Have you ever looked at a map, really looked at it, and found yourself wondering if the lines and landscapes we see aren't just arbitrary boundaries, but actually profound architects of our collective human destiny?
It's a powerful thought, isn't it? And kind of humbling
Yeah.
to consider that the very ground beneath our feet, the mountains, the rivers, the deserts, that they might have, well, in many ways, preordained so much as human history, shaped the rise and fall of civilization.
Absolutely it is. Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take your source material, your articles, your research notes, and we really dig in to extract those crucial nuggets of knowledge, basically giving you a real shortcut to being well informed.
And hopefully with some surprising facts, maybe just enough humor to keep you hooked along the way.
Exactly. And today we're embarking on a truly fascinating deep dive. We're looking at a collection of sources that challenge us to reconsider something incredibly fundamental: the profound and often overlooked role of geography. How it shapes human history, the trajectory of civilizations, even the intricate dance of modern geopolitics.
Right. We're going to unpack the insights of three, well, pretty incredible thinkers here. There's the ancient Greek historian Herodotus, the father of history.
Can't forget him.
No. And then two intellectual giants from the University of Chicago, William H. McNeill and Marshall G.S. Hodgson.
So our mission today is to explore how these scholars, across millennia really, revealed that the physical world, its mountains, rivers, deserts, coastlines, it hasn't merely been a static backdrop for human drama.
No, not at all. They show it as an active force, sometimes even deterministic, you could say. Yet, and this is really crucial, they also meticulously show us that human agency, the choices we make, the beliefs we hold, it still finds a way. It carves its own distinct path, even, in the shadow of the map.
Okay, let's unpack this. This is going to be deep, right? Let's start by setting the scene. We're talking mid to latter 20th century, specifically at the University of Chicago. Now, this wasn't just any academic institution at any time. Our sources paint it as a period bursting with, well, almost unbelievable academic rigor, just a huge amount of intellectual talent concentrated there.
A real golden age of scholarship, you could say, an environment that really fostered incredibly expansive, bold thinking.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about an era where you had intellectual titans like Hans Morgenthau.
Ah, Morgenthau. Defining realism in international relations.
Right. He was there teaching and collaborating alongside our two main subjects for today, William H. McNeill and Marshall G.S. Hodgson.
So Morgenthau's in political science, but McNeill and Hodgson were forging these just prodigious paths right in the history department.
Prodigious is the word. McNeill, with his massive work, literally took on the history of the entire world.
An incredible undertaking.
And Hodgson, with similar ambition, dove into the comprehensive history of Islam, also huge.
And what's really striking about their approach, something the sources keep highlighting, is just the sheer audacity of their subjects, especially in an era that was already, leaning towards academic specialization.
Totally. They pursued topics of immense scale, almost boundless. The term used is Herodotean scope.
Herodotean scope. I like that. It really captures it. Limitless horizons for their research, tackling continents, millennia.
Right, which contrasts so sharply with today, where the emphasis on narrow specialization has only intensified.
And look, specialization brings invaluable insights, of course, through deep focus. But it raises a really important question, doesn't it? What do we lose when we don't encourage or maybe even prioritize thinking broadly about massive subjects like world history?
That's a great point. And McNeill and Hodgson, just by the scale of their work, they demonstrate something profound, that geography itself, it can be a powerful way to think broadly.
How so?
Well, geography, in their hands, it forces you to connect regions that seem disparate, cultures that look unrelated, vast historical eras.
Ah, I see. It forces the connections.
Exactly. Their work is a powerful reminder of a time when scholars felt, perhaps, that their intellectual horizons were just wider.
Yeah.
It's a really compelling contrast to a lot of today's academic landscape.
So let's dive into William H. McNeill then. He really embodied this grand, broad thinking.
He did. In 1963, he published his seminal work, The Rise of the West, A History of the Human Community.
Seminal is right. And it's not just a book, it's a behemoth. Over 800 pages, right?
Easily. But the core argument was truly groundbreaking. It was a direct challenge to the prevailing historical views of the time, especially people like Arnold Toynbee and Oswald Spengler.
Right. Thinkers like Toynbee and Spengler. They largely saw civilizations as these separate entities, pursuing their destinies independently, almost in isolation.
Yeah, like self-contained units.
McNeill argued the complete opposite. His central idea, the real engine of his narrative, was that cultures and civilizations haven't just occasionally bumped into each other. They have continually interacted throughout history.
So it's not just contact, it's constant interplay.
Exactly. These vast movements of peoples, ideas, technologies across the map. That's the essential drama of human history for McNeill.
And he illustrates this right from the earliest human migrations, doesn't he?
Beautifully. For instance, he details this northerly movement of what he calls the Danubian cultivators.
Okay, who are they?
Early farming communities, basically, spreading out from the Fertile Crescent in Anatolia into Central and Western Europe. We're talking maybe 4,500 to 4,000 BC.
Wow, that early.
And at the same time, there's a complementary southerly movement. Pioneer herders and farmers, also starting in the Fertile Crescent, crossing North Africa all the way to Gibraltar.
Where they meet the others.
Effectively, yeah, they met and mingled with the Danubian flood, as he puts it.
Mingled. That's interesting, not replaced.
That's crucial. McNeill stresses this. The older hunting populations in Europe weren't simply destroyed or wiped out. Instead, these movements led to a really profound and lasting mixing of populations and cultures.
So amalgamation, not replacement.
Precisely. And both these big movements, north and south of the Mediterranean, they originate in the Fertile Crescent in Anatolia, which leads us right into this fascinating geographical dichotomy McNeill explores.
Mesopotamia versus Egypt.
Exactly, a stark contrast.
Okay, this is where it gets really interesting because the geography seems to play such a distinct role in how these two ancient civilizations developed, almost setting their initial path.
Absolutely. Let's start with Mesopotamia, essentially ancient Iraq.
Right, and there's that quote from Freya Stark, the travel writer.
Ah, yes, describing Iraq as a frontier province, right-angled and obnoxious to the predestined paths of man.
Which sounds harsh, but
But it's remarkably vivid and, in a way, accurate. McNeill echoes this. Mesopotamia literally cut across some of history's bloodiest, most frequently used migration routes.
okay, so vulnerable from the start.
Very. Now think about the Tigris-Euphrates Valley.
Yeah.
Gently sloping landscape. Seemed like a blessing, right? Made irrigation incredibly easy. Cities flourished quickly.
Sounds good so far.
But the downside, McNeill explains, is that these wealthy cities became tempting objects of plunder, sitting ducks for nomadic groups or others on the margins.
Ah, so the ease of irrigation was also a vulnerability.
A profound one. And it gets worse. As more land got cultivated, fields inevitably met.
Leading to disputes.
Exactly, and with no inherent central authority to settle boundaries or divvy up water during shortages, you get chronic, almost perpetual war.
Constant instability.
Right, which actually invited conquerors, people like Sargon, sweeping in from the margins around 2400 BC to impose order.
So the geography creates a problem and then invites a certain kind of solution.
Kind of a brutal solution,
Yeah.
often. This whole cycle. It's eerily like what Ibn Khaldun, the 14th century historian, observed.
Khaldun's theory
Yeah.
about luxury leading to decadence.
Yeah, that luxurious living weakens a state over generations, makes it soft, invites invasion from tougher groups on the periphery who then start their own dynasty, and the cycle repeats.
And in Mesopotamia, the landscape almost physically enforced that cycle.
It seems that way. In ancient Iraq, this constant threat, internal and external, led directly to the most suffocating kinds of tyranny.
Right, the sources mention names Tiglath-Pileser, Ashurnasirpal II, Sennacherib.
Infamous rulers,
Yeah.
known for unbelievable cruelty, megalomania, mass deportations, all designed to break resistance.
A chilling pattern. And it culminates, perhaps disturbingly, with Saddam Hussein in modern times.
The implication is there, yes,
Yeah.
suggesting this deep, enduring geographical tendency,
Ah.
a region prone to invasion, fragmentation,
Hmm.
maybe requiring extraordinary, often brutal tyranny just to hold together.
You know, it's important, as the sources note, that this isn't absolute determinism, right? Iraq did have, like, a parliamentary system for a while in the 20th century.
Exactly. McNeill, Khaldun, Stark. They're describing powerful tendencies, deep inclinations shaped by geography, not unbreakable laws. Human agency still matters. Choices are still made.
Okay, but the contrast with Egypt is just
Yeah.
huge.
It's profound. Geography seems almost benevolent there in comparison. McNeill explained how Egypt's geography led to a much less oppressive form of rule.
How so?
We'll picture it. Deserts gave the land of Egypt clear-cut and easily defensible boundaries.
Natural walls.
Exactly. While the Nile, provided it with a natural backbone and nervous system.
Yeah.
So the intense, brutal, centralized control needed in Mesopotamia just wasn't as necessary along the Nile.
Frontier defense wasn't the main worry.
Rarely a serious existential problem for the pharaohs. Unlike Mesopotamia sitting on migration crossroads, infiltration from Libyans or Asiatics was relatively minor, manageable. Egypt was protected by deserts, the sea.
They're more secure.
Incredibly secure. For probably 4,000 years, most Egyptians likely never saw an invading host in their midst. That's almost unimaginable elsewhere back then.
Wow. And the Nile itself.
An absolute marvel for transport and communication, a gift of nature. The river flows north.
Taking boats downstream?
Right, and the prevailing winds generally blow south.
So you can sail upstream easily.
Precisely. A built-in two-way transportation system. Civilization could dawn and flourish there with a natural unity unknown in fragmented Mesopotamia.
That's amazing.
And McNeill makes this powerful, almost heartbreaking point. Mesopotamian rulers could avail themselves of no ready-made natural instrument for securing their centralized authority.
They had to build it artificially.
Exactly. They had slowly and painfully to develop oppressive law and bureaucratic administration as an artificial substitute for the natural articulation which geography gave to Egypt.
Painfully.
And adding to their woes, the Tigris and Euphrates had much more capricious, violent floods than the Nile. Complicated irrigation, complicated stable organization. The sheer effort required was immense.
So, looking at the modern Middle East, while both Egypt and Iraq have had dictatorships.
The fact that Iraqs have historically been, well, arguably far more brutal and consistently oppressive, you can trace that back, at least partly, to antiquity, to geography itself.
A powerful testament to the landscape's enduring influence.
Definitely. Now, moving beyond the immediate Middle East, McNeill also talks about peripheral civilizations.
India, Greece, China.
That's them. Located on the fringes of the ancient civilized world's core, Greece and India certainly drew inspiration from older cultures, Indus Valley, Minoan Crete. But all three also absorbed influences, sometimes pressures, from what McNeill terms barbarian invaders.
They had some protection.
Crucial protection, yes. Geography helped. Greece and India, with mountains to the north, Himalayas, etc., were effectively sheltered from the direct impact of steppe cavalry, those devastating nomadic forces.
Right. And China.
Even more isolated, shielded by inhospitable deserts, high peaks, and sheer distance. Thousands of miles of natural barriers separated the Yellow River Valley from the Middle East and India.
So this mix of influence and isolation
Led to utterly original civilizations, especially China, developing largely separately from the continuous interaction of the greater desert Middle East, that vast belt from North Africa to Turkestan.
So barriers aren't just boundaries, they can foster originality.
Precisely. Now, throughout antiquity, McNeill sees this ebb and flow of frontiers between Hellenic, Middle Eastern, Indian civilizations, creating this dynamic cultural balance across Eurasia.
But that gets disrupted.
Profoundly disrupted. Medieval centuries, massive influx of steppe peoples from the north, most notably the Mongols.
The Mongols.
It was largely through them, 13th, 14th centuries, that the Silk Route really flourished, bringing Eurasian civilizations from the Pacific to the Mediterranean into more significant contact.
But China still stayed somewhat separate.
Largely, yes, formed its own geographical and cultural sphere. Tibet, Mongolia, Japan, Korea, all orienting themselves to different degrees towards the Middle Kingdom, forging their own distinct paths too.
Interesting. McNeill notes something about Tibet and Mongolia's environment limiting them.
Yeah, the severe limitations of a high desert environment made anything more than a proto-civilization impossible there, he argues.
But still, human agency finds a way, like the Tibetans resisting Chinese influence.
Exactly. Tibetan Lamaists, always conscious of the Indian Buddhist origins of their faith, resisted complete Sinification, assimilation into China, by appealing to traditions from India next door, faith as a cultural anchor against the geographical pull.
So history, for McNeill, is fluid. Things only seem fixed by geography.
Right. It's always in transition. Constant cultural interchange, borrowing, adapting, that's how history is woven. Not isolated events, but this dynamic process.
He uses that metaphor, civilizations like mountain ranges.
Yeah, powerful image, rising through geologic time, only to be slowly eroded down. And in human history's shorter span, civilizations erode too. Circumstances change. Neighbors borrow or react. It's a constant global dialogue.
This idea of erosion and borrowing, it terrified Oswald Spengler, didn't it?
Absolutely. Spengler valued those deep soil ties, believed high cultures were spellbound in the place of their birth. Anything disconnected from the land became rigid and hard for him.
He saw high culture starting in the countryside and ending in materialism in the world cities.
Cosmopolitanism was rootlessness to Spengler, tied to the soil. Which raises a huge question for us today, right? This massive rise of urban Western civilization becoming global, increasingly divorced from the soil.
What does that mean?
Well, McNeill, much more pragmatically than Spengler, stayed incredibly attentive to climate and geography through all this.
Like the example of the Aryans.
Yeah, ancient Indo-Iranians
Oh.
developed a less warlike culture in India's Gangetic Plain compared to Mediterranean Europe. McNeill links this partly to the subcontinent's dense forests monsoonal cycle, encouraging meditation, religious knowledge maybe, rather than constant war.
Fascinating. And Greek Ionia.
Its precocity, its rapid advancement. McNeill says largely due to its close proximity and contact with older, sophisticated civilizations in Asia Minor and the Orient, geography enabling interaction again.
But he pulls back from pure determinism. That's important.
Crucial nuance. Greece's mountains favored small city-states, yes. But he notes sometimes contiguous expanses of fertile ground were broken up into different city-states, even where geography didn't strictly force it.
So human decisions, social structures matter too.
Always. And above all, there's the incredible story of the Jews.
Right? Defying geographical logic.
Totally. Unlike Hinduism or Buddhism, deeply tied to specific regions, the Romans destroy the community in Judea. But Judaism doesn't end. It evolves, flourishes in scattered cities across the diaspora for 2,000 years.
Maintaining identity without a homeland?
A powerful reminder. Ideas, beliefs, human agency can matter as much, maybe more, than physical terrain.
Still. The story of Europe itself, McNeill argues, shows geography's strong hand.
He does. Reaches back to the dawn of history. Western Europe had distinct geographical advantages that technology, especially during the Dark Ages, eventually unlocked.
Like what?
Wide, fertile plains for farming, an indented coastline, lots of natural harbors for trade, navigable rivers flowing north, extending commerce beyond the Mediterranean's reach, abundant timber and metals.
And the climate. Harsh, cold, wet compared to the Med. That was good.
Counterintuitive, right? But Arnold Toynbee, who also wasn't a fatalist despite his cyclical view, wrote, "Ease is inimical to civilization. The greater the ease of the environment, the weaker the stimulus towards civilization."
Ah, so challenge spurs innovation.
That's the idea. Europe developed partly because its geography was difficult, but it also had natural nodal points for transporting commerce, letting solutions spread.
Civilizations as reactions to tough environments.
In many ways, yes. Think about Viking raids.
Yeah.
Relentless pressure on Western European coasts.
Force them to organize.
Exactly. Compelled England and France to articulate themselves as national entities. Feudal kingdoms had to unite for defense.
And England, being an island.
Had better defined frontiers, as Toynbee notes.
Yeah.
Achieved national cohesion sooner than continental neighbors. Geography again.
Of course, some landscapes are too difficult. Arctic, Australian interior.
Right. Can lead to collapse or arrested development. Toynbee argues this often follows an amazing feat of adaptation, like Eskimos surviving on winter ice. But once survival is achieved, maybe they can't master the environment enough for full, complex civilization.
Jared Diamond talks about this too, right? Environmental problems leading to collapse. Greenland Vikings, Easter Island.
Anasazi, Mayans, yes. Europe, it seems, offered that perfect degree of environmental difficulty. Challenging, but not insurmountable. And critically, in the northern temperate zone, proximate to cultural hearths in Africa, the Middle East, the steppe, eventually North America.
Proximity was key.
Crucial, allowed Europeans to eventually exploit emerging global trade patterns, especially with tech advances in navigation. Think Vasco da Gama mastering monsoon winds.
Connecting global geography like never before.
Turning the outer edges of Eurasia into the world's main sea lanes, under European dominance eventually.
But for McNeill, it wasn't just material advancement. It was also the closing of the barbarian spaces.
This is a critical concept in Rise of the West.
Yeah.
Hashtag C. The closing of barbarian spaces and a united world.
Okay, closing of the barbarian spaces. What exactly does McNeill mean by that?
He's talking about the inexorable, if not entirely uninterrupted, encroachment of civilizations upon barbarism.
And barbarism here isn't a moral judgment.
No, not really. It means areas not yet fully absorbed into complex, settled, urbanized state structures. This encroachment, he argues, systematically built up the mass and internal variety of separate civilizations.
Okay.
And it increased contact between them, preparing the way for the spectacular unification of the globe over the last few centuries.
So this civilizational closure of relatively empty spaces, primarily the temperate zone, when does that really kick off?
Fundamentally, with those great voyages of discovery, late 15th, early 16th centuries, Vasco da Gama, Columbus, Magellan.
The usual suspects.
Right. Then it continues through familiar stages, revolutions in industry, transport, communications, each step shrinking the world, accelerating globalization.
And in between.
The final collapse of nomadic steppe peoples as a major world force. Russia, China, the Habsburgs, basically partitioning Central Eurasia,
Carving it up.
pretty much. Concurrently, the violent securing of North America's western frontier, tragic collapse of indigenous populations, and European colonial encroachment on sub-Saharan Africa. The physical world being settled, claimed.
So McNeill, looking at all this up to his time, he sees the world as finally united.
United under a largely Western, increasingly urbanized culture is how he puts it. He points out even ideologies like communism, yes, drawing on Russian traditions, were still, in a sense, pathologies of the industrialized West, born from its upheavals.
And Nazism, too.
A pathology of an inflation-racked, rapidly modernizing West, grappling with industrial warfare's trauma. He's not talking political unity, mind you.
No, more like deep underlying cultural, geographic, demographic trends pushing towards one global system.
Exactly. Now, while a central theme is this closing of empty spaces, it's crucial to get this. It's only true in a relative sense. Just because railroads cross a continent doesn't mean there aren't still vast, sparsely inhabited areas between the tracks.
Okay.
But what McNeill saw, and what shapes our world so urgently today, is that even if frontiers are formally closed, the density of human population and the intensity of electronic interaction keep increasing steeply, exponentially almost.
And that rate of increase, that shrinking world feeling, that's the political drama now.
Absolutely. McNeill, writing in the 60s, could think of a united world where nowhere was more than a few weeks away.
But now?
How does geopolitics change when remote places are separated by days or hours? The world was connected in the 18th, 19th centuries, sure. But that world bears little relation in demography, technology, interconnectedness to ours now.
So the core drama today is the relentless filling up of space. A truly closed geography.
Where states, militaries, populations have less room to hide, less buffer. Think about it. Mechanized armies a century ago had to cross miles, took weeks, months.
No.
Overlapping missile ranges, continents crossed in minutes. Geography doesn't disappear.
It becomes even more critical.
Defining vulnerability's strategic reach in totally new ways.
Let's look at this closure from another angle. Morgenthau's insight.
Right. His argument that imperial expansion into those relatively empty spaces in the 18th, 19th centuries, Africa, Eurasia, North America, actually deflected great power politics.
Channeled rivalries outward. Reduced direct conflict between them.
That was his point. Russia, France, the U.S., busy expanding out there, less focused on fighting each other directly in Europe, made the world maybe more peaceful or redirected the violence.
But by the late 19th century, that changes.
Consolidation of nation-states, empires.
Yeah.
Mostly complete. No more easy, empty spaces. Territorial gains now only come at another great power's expense. Conflict becomes much more likely.
And Morgenthau, writing during the Cold War.
Summed it up starkly. The periphery of the balance of power now coincides with the confines of the earth. His vision spelled danger. No escape valve for great power competition.
But his colleague McNeill, writing later, more hopeful.
Almost cyclical. McNeill suggested the warring states of the 20th century seem headed for a similar resolution, like Han China ending centuries of conflict by creating a stable empire. Maybe global empire was the logical endpoint for McNeill, a way to end the conflicts.
And after the Berlin Wall fell in '89, that optimism seemed right for a moment. History ending, maybe?
It felt like that. Yet here we are. World arguably as dangerous, maybe more so than during the Cold War. Why?
Because the map keeps closing in new ways.
Exactly. Take China. Mao consolidates the state. Immense cost, yes. Now China rises economically, militarily, filling up the Eurasian chessboard more completely than Morgenthau could have imagined.
It's a massive geopolitical shift on a shrinking stage.
And meanwhile, even remote parts get more urbanized. Concentrating populations, resource demands.
This urban shift, McNeill saw it coming.
He intuited it. Spengler saw cultural decline and leaving the soil. McNeill saw that sprawling urban conglomerations are radically changing religion identity in vigorous, sometimes troubling ways.
Like Islam in urban slums.
Where traditional family ties weaken, Islam can become less tied to local custom, more austere, maybe more ideological, designed for chaotic, anonymous environments.
Paradoxically leading to low local crime in some megacities, but maybe also enabling destabilizing global terrorism from offshoots.
That's the complex picture suggested. Christianity changes too. More ideological, maybe, in rapidly expanding U.S. suburbs.
And that environmental paganism in European cities.
Yeah, a kind of reverence for nature replacing traditional nationalism, perhaps, especially with the abstract EU state. Physical geography and social environment profoundly reshaping belief.
And conflict itself has transformed.
Dramatically. No longer just the sport of kings, 18th century style. Now it's an instrument of virulent nationalist religious fanaticism. Nazi Germany on a vast scale, Al-Qaeda smaller but globally impactful.
Add nuclear weapons and biochem in radical hands.
The stakes are terrifyingly high. And amidst these turbulent shifts, classical geography powerfully rears its head again.
Shaping tensions. West, Russia, Iran, India, China, Korea, Japan.
All of them. McNeill's thesis of continuous interaction across civilizations, never truer than today, everyone's connected. But
an emerging world culture doesn't equal political stability.
Profound mistake to think it does. Because space, precisely because it's more crowded, contested, precious than ever, still matters greatly.
Okay, so while McNeill scanned the whole Earth, Marshall Hodgson's main focus, at least for our sources here, was narrower, the greater Middle East, as he termed it.
Right. But don't let narrower fool you. His ambition was easily as vast as McNeill's. Hodgson, a passionate Quaker, tragically died young, only 46.
Wow.
But his 3-volume masterpiece, The Venture of Islam, Conscience and History in a World Civilization, published posthumously in '74. It's monumental.
What was his core goal with that?
A groundbreaking effort, really, to put Islam geographically and culturally firmly in the context of the larger currents of world history.
Okay.
His style can be dense, academic sometimes, yeah.
Yeah.
But if you stick with it, you get this incredible sweeping explanation. How Islam emerged, took root, spread so fabulously fast. Arabia, North Africa, Indian Ocean, overland Pyrenees to Central Asia.
Amazing reach.
It's a profound testament to how human and physical landscapes connect.
And he was writing much of this in the 50s and 60s, when the focus was all Europe and the Cold War.
Exactly. Yet right in his first volume, he forcefully argues that this Eurocentric view, Europe at the center, it's always been wrong. A bias built even into early maps.
Like the Mercator projection.
He specifically calls out its absurdity, how it exaggerates northern land masses, making an artificially bounded Europe look larger than all Africa and quite dwarf India.
So what does he do instead?
He consciously shifts our focus, southward and eastward, to what he calls the oikoumene.
Oikoumene, ancient Greek for the inhabited quarter of the world.
That's it. For Hodgson, it describes the temperate zone of the Afro-Asian landmass. Broadly, North Africa to Western China. Sometimes he calls it Nile to Oxus.
Those definitions seem a bit flexible.
Intentionally so, I think. The point is, the rigid distinctions of Cold War expertise, Middle East, separate from Anatolia, separate from India, they fall away in Hodgson's view.
He sees a more organic, fluid geography, defined by landscape and cultural flow, not political lines.
Exactly. This vast, generally parched expanse between Europe and China. He intuits it holds a key to understanding world history.
And given today's globalization blurring borders, his flexible concept seems really useful.
Incredibly useful. Shows how inhospitable the physical map can be to fixed lines. Helps visualize the fluid world Islam emerged in, and maybe our interconnected world now.
So the specific region where Islamic culture formed, how does he define that?
Almost negatively, he says, as that residual group of lands in which the Greek and the Sanskrit traditions did not have their roots. Basically, the lands left over between Europe and India.
And within this huge belt, the greater Middle East, what geographical features encouraged Islam's rise?
2 key things, he argues. First, the crucial commercial position, especially Arabia and the Fertile Crescent, sitting on those vast oikoumene trade routes, arteries of ancient commerce.
Okay, trade routes make sense. What's the second?
This is the counterintuitive one. The very aridity of the region.
Lack of water encouraged high culture. How?
Hodgson explains. Lack of water reduced agricultural wealth. Concentrated land holdings were rare. Rural life was often precarious.
Pushing people towards cities.
Exactly. Urban life and oases, market towns gained prominence, became centers of activity, wealth.
And money and power converged where?
With merchants, at the juncture points of long-distance trade routes, especially where overland routes met sea traffic, Red Sea, Arabian Sea, Persian Gulf, giving Arab merchants access to Indian Ocean trade, India, East Africa, beyond.
And in this world of trade?
Contracts, reliable dealings were paramount. Ethical behavior, just dealing. They became crucial for stable economic life, simply good for business.
So with the big empires to the north weakening,
Byzantine, Sassanid, preoccupied with their own issues. The stage was set in Arabia and the Fertile Crescent, set for a faith emphasizing universal ethics, clear moral codes.
not just tied to agriculture or local gods.
Right. Islam, with its focus on contracts, community, just dealings, it springs up as much a merchant's creed, reflecting that society's needs, as a desert one.
Fascinating. And Mecca itself, hugely strategic location.
Paramount, most important trading center in western central Arabia, in the Hejaz, near the Red Sea, sitting right at the intersection of two major trade routes.
North, south, and west-east.
Yep. North-south,
Yep.
Yemen, Indian Ocean, up to Syria, Mediterranean. West-east, Horn of Africa, across to Mesopotamia, Iran.
And it was independent.
Far enough from Sassan power to stay independent, yet constantly exposed to urbane influences via those routes. Zoroastrianism, Hellenism, Judaism
Wow.
had enough water for camels, travelers, protected by hills from pirates, and crucially had the Kaaba shrine, sacred tokens gathered there attracting pilgrims, made it a truly pulsing cosmopolitan center, shaped by unique geography.
Of course, geography doesn't fully explain Islam's origins.
No, a religion's basis is ultimately metaphysical. But Hodgson profoundly shows how geography contributed significantly. Islam coalesced onto existing merchant and Bedouin patterns, which were themselves creatures of an arid landscape crisscrossed by ancient trade routes.
He talks about Bedouin Arabia being bracketed by fertile lands.
Yes, Syria to the north, Iraq northeast, Yemen south. And each of these in turn connected to a political hinterland, usually highlands dominating them.
Anatolia for Syria, Iran for Iraq, Abyssinia for Yemen.
Right. Islam would eventually conquer most of these. And geography partly determined that these clusters, especially Syria and Iraq, the Fertile Crescent arcs would retain their identity, become rival centers of Islamic power.
So this teaches us something important about modern Middle Eastern states.
Absolutely. Hodgson shows many states often dismissed as artificial colonial creations are actually ancient redoubts of civilizations, rich pre-Islamic pasts. Egypt, Yemen, Syria, Iraq, Morocco, Tunisia. Legitimate precursors, even if desert borders look arbitrary on a map.
That counters the idea of Islam being destined as one monolithic thing.
Totally. Hodgson shows many distinct population nodes, rich pre-Islamic pasts that resurface powerfully post-colonially and still shape things today. Like the Iranian highlands, always related to Mesopotamia, very evident since 2003. That border shifted for a millennium.
Geography influencing military history too, like horse nomadism versus camel nomadism.
Crucial point Hodgson makes. Mongol and Turkic horse nomadism was ultimately more historically significant than Arab camel nomadism.
Why? Horses couldn't handle the deep deserts.
Exactly, and the sheep they traveled with needed decent forage. So Mongol armies largely avoided distant Arabia.
But ravaged closer, greener lands.
Eastern Europe, Anatolia, northern Mesopotamia, Iran, Central Asia, India, China. Overwhelmingly strategic territories just before gunpowder. The Mongol-Turkic invasions, arguably the biggest event of the second millennium CE, reshaped the world, largely due to specific animals tied to geography.
What's really fascinating here is how Hodgson uses all this, Islam, Mongols, to show something bigger.
Right. The venture of Islam is way more than area expertise. Calling him just an Arabist diminishes him. Islam becomes a vehicle for him to reveal pivotal trends, intellectual, cultural, geographical, across the entire Old World. The Orchomeny at its heart.
He weaves it all together, mysticism, landscape, politics.
Seamlessly. And by integrating geography so deeply, he shows how it interacts with politics, ideology, to produce the very texture of history. Take the Ottomans.
Okay.
Replace Seljuks in Anatolia, build a vast empire. But Hodgson argues their monolithic military caste system had inherent geographical limits.
Well, so?
They operated with one grand army, emperors always present, from one capital, Constantinople. So a major campaign could only go as far as one season's march allowed.
Setting practical limit.
Vienna northwest, Mosul southeast. Those are the effective limits on land. This absolutist system, all power in Constantinople, made geography an all-determining factor, led to decay once expansion limits were hit, couldn't get more resources to sustain the system.
Interesting. A less centralized state might have been more adaptable.
Perhaps. Allowed more provincial autonomy, decentralized military, maybe more secure long-term. Even at sea, absolutism, exaggerated locations, tyranny, Ottoman power clustered near home, Black Sea, Med, only transient success against Portuguese far off in the Indian Ocean. Centralization plus geography equals limitation.
Hodgson, like McNeill, real old-world intellectuals, the source says. Rigorous inquiry.
Saw the grand sweep even in tiny details. And it's no coincidence Hodgson's main stage, the Oikoumene, is also McNeill's background and Herodotus' setting.
And it's still the region dominating headlines today. Eastern Med to Iranian-Afghan plateau.
Exactly. Where Eurasia and Africa converge, critical outlets to Indian Ocean, makes it ultra-strategic. Crossroads of empires, trade, also a dense stew of migration patterns, clashing groups. Herodotus captured that unceasing turbulence millennia ago. It continues.
Which brings us beautifully to Herodotus himself, born Asia Minor, sometime 490-484 BC. His huge work, Histories, it achieves this perfect balance, the sources say, between geography and human decisions.
Partial determinism is the phrase used. A world where the relief map, the physical landscape, constantly hovers in the background, influencing things.
But not deciding everything.
No. Because within that geographical frame, individual passions are acted out with devastating political results.
And this sensibility, holding both grand forces and individual agency together, that's what we need to recover.
The sources suggest exactly that, if we want to be less surprised by the world to come. Herodotus' great strength is evoking just what human beings are capable of believing, and how those beliefs shape actions within their environment.
The ancients, they saw things differently.
Without modern science, technology, they literally saw and heard differently, more vividly. Landscape, geography were real to them in ways we cannot imagine. Filled with power, spirits, terrifying maybe. #AB. How ancients saw the world, a different reality.
He captures this so well when he quotes Pindar, "Custom is king of all."
Yeah. Herodotus details all these ancient customs that seem utterly bizarre to us now, but were deeply logical for the people then.
Like Egyptians shaving eyebrows when a cat died.
A sacred animal, yes. Or Libyan tribesmen with unique hairstyles, bodies painted with red vermilion.
And the Massagetæ, east of the Caspian Sea. That's unsettling.
Ritualistically consuming their elders in a banquet, an act of reverence incorporating their wisdom.
Strange to us, but Herodotus shows these customs weren't arbitrary.
No, intrinsically tied to the landscape, the historical experience of a people on it, and the manners and ideas that arise out of that experience, organic outgrowths.
He was preserving memory, geography, myths, beliefs, even the lies they lived by.
Because he understood those beliefs were their reality. He knew a leader with a knack for just what's out there, an intuitive grasp of geographical reality. The people on it makes fewer mistakes.
Like Artabanus warning Darius about the Scythians.
Exactly. Don't attack these swiftly mobile and nomadic people without cities or sown land. They offer no focal point of attack for a big army. Darius didn't listen. Disaster. Geographically informed advice ignored.
What's really captivating, though, is that story of Phidippides, the runner.
Ah, yes. Sent Athens to Sparta for aid against the Persians. Famously claimed he met the god Pan on Mount Parthenium.
And Pan asked why Athens ignored him, promising to be their friend.
Right. And the Athenians heard this, believed it completely, set up a shrine to Pan after they won at Marathon.
Now, Herodotus presents this not just as a charming story.
No. The sources suggest it may well be the truth as the Athenians related it. Subtle but powerful distinction. Phidippides probably believed he saw Pan.
Why?
Extreme fatigue, his ingrained belief system, that wonder-filled fear of the physical elements that has since been lost to human beings. In that state, he did see Pan.
Pasternak captures this in Dr. Zhivago.
Beautifully. Nature hit you in the eye so plainly and grabbed you so fiercely by the scruff of the neck that perhaps it really was still full of gods. A world alive, sentient.
Which raises a huge question for us today. If our modern rationalism means we can't even imagine what Phidippides saw, have we lost something crucial?
Maybe. If we've lost that wonder-filled fear, maybe we're incapable of truly understanding and defending against powerful religious movements that reverse the Enlightenment, affect geopolitics today.
And while the physical world is filled up now, the new geography. Slums, shantytowns.
Those neither nor landscapes. They manifest an equally intense psychological effect, shaping beliefs, actions. Understanding ancient landscapes helps appreciate the impact of these new, challenging geographies. Definitely. Herodotus also digs deep into what the sources call the province of the heart. He's incredibly receptive to human intrigues, motivations.
Showing how self-interest isn't cold calculation.
Often not. It's calculated within a disfiguring whirlwind of passion. Emotions, desires, personal agendas driving things.
Like the story of Atossa, King Darius's wife.
Perfect illustration. Herodotus shows her using Darius's vanity, in bed no less, to convince him to invade Greece.
Her motive was an empire.
Nope. A personal favor to her Greek doctor. He'd cured a growth on her breast, and he just wanted to go home for a visit.
Wow, the fate of nations hinging on personal desire.
It is all about geography, until it becomes all about Shakespeare. That brilliant line from the sources, it perfectly captures Herodotus.
Geography sets the stage, but human drama plays out on it.
Exactly. His histories, deep down, is about understanding Moira, fate, the destiny hanging over human affairs, and heroes in the classical sense.
They overcome fate, or grapple with it.
Through courage, virtue, they naturally form the superstructure of his narrative.
Marshall Hodgson noted this too, right? Herodotus wrote to preserve great deeds, unrepeatable deeds that have an enduring claim to our respect.
Yes. And Hodgson himself, despite detailing vast historical environmental trends, forcefully emphasizes, without individual struggle, individual choices, actions, there's no humanism in history.
Which is how he builds his history of Islam. A global force, yes.
But one that started with the actions of individuals in Mecca.
So we keep coming back to this tension. How do we reconcile these vast, seemingly deterministic forces of geography, mountains, rivers, deserts, with the real, unpredictable impact of individual choices, passions, beliefs?
That ongoing struggle for destiny, that dance between the inevitable and the chosen. It's truly at the heart of history, ancient and modern. Defines the human experience. Hashtag take 3. Navigating the closed geography of the 21st century. Hashtag tag 2. The unsettling truth of prediction.
Okay, moving into our final section here. We're now in what the sources call exceedingly rough terrain, that of geopolitics and the quasi-determinist theories that emanate from it.
Rough terrain indeed.
And here's the unsettling truth they put forward. The broad outlines of history have in fact been predicted by great thinkers, and might still be again.
Which is profoundly unsettling, isn't it?
Yeah.
Given how much we want to believe individuals can alter history through sheer will, and yet there seems to be a persistent pattern.
Recall Morgenthau's insight again, the balance of power. His argument that imperial expansion into those relatively empty geographical spaces in the 18th, 19th centuries
Africa, Eurasia, North America.
actually deflected great power politics into the periphery, provided an outlet, allowed expansion without direct clashes between the big players.
Reducing direct conflict in their core territories, paradoxically.
But by the late 19th century, that dynamic changes completely. Consolidation of nation-states, empires, few empty spaces left.
Right. From then on, significant gains only come at another great power's direct expense.
Morgenthau, writing in the tense, nuclear, early Cold War years, summed it up. The periphery of the balance of power now coincides with the confines of the earth.
Spelling persistent danger, no escape valve.
Yet his colleague McNeill, writing later, more stable Cold War phase, offered a more hopeful, cyclical view.
Suggesting the warring states of the 20th century seem headed for a similar resolution, like Han China unifying after centuries of strife.
And for a moment after the Berlin Wall fell in '89, McNeill's optimism seemed vindicated. A period of global unity, maybe.
It felt like it. But here we are. World arguably is dangerous, maybe more so. Why?
Because the map keeps closing, in multiple, subtle, powerful ways, even if empty spaces are relative.
The density of population and electronic interaction keeps increasing, steeply, accelerating. Hashtag text debut. The intensified relevance of geography in a crowded world.
Creating truly new geopolitical realities. A century ago, armies took weeks, months to cross miles.
Now, overlapping ranges of precision missiles, continents crossed in minutes. Geography doesn't disappear.
It becomes even more critical.
Every mountain range, choke point, coastline, land bridge. Its strategic importance is magnified when distance isn't a buffer.
Look at China's rise. Mao consolidates the state. Now China rises economically, militarily.
Filling up the Eurasian chessboard more comprehensively than Morgenthau could have imagined. A massive geopolitical shift. A unified power exerting influence across a vast, interconnected continent.
And in this hyper-connected, crowded, contested world, classical geography comes roaring back.
Powerfully, shaping tensions. West, Russia, Iran, India, China, Korea, Japan, The list goes on. McNeil's core idea of continuous, intensified interactions. Never truer. The whole world is one interactive system now.
But an emerging world culture, shared tech, global markets doesn't automatically mean political stability.
Huge mistake to equate them. Because space still matters. Matters greatly, as the sources say, precisely because it's more crowded and therefore more precious than ever before. Every square inch, every resource, every strategic spot, a point of potential conflict. Hashtag key. The wisdom of the old world intellectuals.
And this is exactly where the wisdom of these old world intellectuals like McNeil and Hodgson becomes so vital right now.
They weren't just curious. They had the rigor of tireless scientific inquiry, digging into sources, massive data, before computers made it easy.
And even deep in the details, they never lost sight of the grand sweep, history and the geography underlying it.
And it's surely no coincidence their main stage, especially Hodgson's Okamini, is precisely the region dominating today's headlines, day after day.
That volatile, ultra-strategic zone, Eastern Med to the Iranian-Afghan plateau.
Where Eurasia and Africa converge. Critical outlets to the Indian Ocean. Makes it ultra-strategic, yes. But also that inevitable stew of migration patterns, clashing ethnic sectarian groups.
Herodotus saw that unceasing turbulence millennia ago. Still defines the region.
We absolutely need to engage deeply with these thinkers, even the ones who seem to lean toward geographical determinism. We need them to establish a framework.
A framework for understanding what we are up against around the world and what can be achieved in it.
Exactly. Their insights provide an essential historical geographical lens to view our complex, interconnected, crowded world, to make sense of its present, maybe anticipate its future. Hashtag outro.
So today, we've taken a really deep dive into these compelling arguments from McNeil, Hodgson, and Herodotus, revealing how geography isn't just, a static background.
No, it's a dynamic shaping force, right in the very texture of human civilization. From the different destinies of Mesopotamia and Egypt, to Islam's emergence and spread, the rise of the West, the landscape has always been a key player. Still is.
Yet, as we saw so vividly with Herodotus' stories of human passion, and Hodgson's stress on individual choices, human agency, our decisions, our beliefs, our spirit, it continually pushes back, sometimes powerfully against the map's dictates.
That interplay, that delicate, enduring balance between the relentless forces of the physical world and the, indomitable will of humanity. That is the ongoing drama of history unfolding right now.
So as you look at any map today, maybe consider not just the political borders we draw on it, but think about the ancient mountain ranges that shaped cultures, the timeless river flows that sustained life and trade, and the vast, now crowded spaces that continue to whisper the story of who we are.
And perhaps where we are going. Could it be that the greatest challenge of our increasingly closed world isn't just mastering technology, its rapid changes, but maybe it's mastering our shared geography? Both the physical landscapes around us and, perhaps more importantly, the psychological terrains within us that are so profoundly shaped by them.